got right to it, sat down. So, well, we're going to get started. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out here, and I'm glad you could find our community center with the light turned off on the road. So welcome to our educational forum, Battery Storage, Climate, and the Grid, the proposed Lincoln Park project in context. My name is Jen Metzger. I'm the Director of Citizens for Local Power, which is based right here in Rosendale. We are dedicated to helping our communities shift to a more locally based clean energy economy because that's what's best for the climate. It keeps our energy dollars local. It's good for our long-term resilience and our energy security. So it's good all around. And we've been involved not just at the local level, but in advocacy at the state level as well. We've been participating in a number of Public Service Commission proceedings around energy reforms, as well as the current utility rate cases with Central Hudson. The impetus for tonight's forum is a project proposed by a company called GlidePath to build a power generation facility in the town of Ulster that combines 20 megawatts of a gas-fired power plant with about 20 megawatts of battery storage. So now, when I first learned about this project, I have to say I was totally baffled by it. And I'm somebody who's kind of steeped in energy every day. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me because when I think of storage, I think, well, we use storage basically to replace fossil fuels, right? Because it addresses the intermittency problem with renewables. When the sun is shining, the wind is blowing, if you have storage, you can store that power, and then when the sun is down and the wind's not blowing, you can use that power, right? So that's how we think about it. So it was perplexing to me that we have this storage project that is combined with fossil fuels, natural gas. So, one big question is why is this project being proposed in this form? Why storage and gas? It's counter from my perspective, to the direction that we should be going, which is toward 100% renewables. Another big question is what exactly is the purpose of this proposed project? What services will it provide us and the grid? The description in the company's environmental assessment form states that, quote, the project will provide short-term peaking power generation, assist in the integration of variable renewable generation from wind and solar projects, and provide critical resiliency services such as microgrinding and grid start. So they use all the right buzzwords in this project description, but how does it support renewables? What is the role of the gas piece, if any? What are the resiliency benefits, and who is benefiting from them? This forum is going to sort of unpack this project and shed some daylight on it so we can understand it a bit better. And it's going to look at some of the key questions for the review process, the environmental review process that is just getting underway. The biggest question is really, in my mind, is the emissions impacts of this project. So we're going to be addressing that issue as well tonight. But beyond this specific project at hand, it's really important for us to learn about and know about energy storage, the different ways it can work on the grid, so that we can talk about this in an intelligent way, as we're looking into and trying to have input in this process. And so we can also talk about what's wrong with the project and what kind of projects do we want to invite here? What do we want to see here in the future? So it's not just about fighting bad projects, but it's about encouraging the good projects, right? Because we're going to have to make this shift in our local energy system, and we want to encourage the shift in the right direction. We are incredibly fortunate to have some of the best minds on the subject right here on our panel, and I'm going to introduce them shortly. But first, I just want to provide some very basic context for the discussion that's going to follow. For some of you here that are familiar faces, You know, you're very knowledgeable about the energy system and how it works, but and it's old hat to you. But for others, you know, this might be a new topic for you entirely. So, at its most basic, you know, what is the grid? What is, when we're talking about the electricity grid, what is it? It's the electricity infrastructure that gets the power from where it's generated to where it's consumed, right? But it has two, I guess I think of them as components. There are two components of the system. One is transmission, the transmission system, and the other is the distribution system. The transmission system carries power over great distances at high voltages. That power is then stepped down on the local distribution system to be a usable form at your house, so when you flick the switch on, the light goes on, and you don't get electrocuted. The power grid is actually really an incredible marvel, if you think about it. I mean, all of the sources of generation and consumption have to be balanced 24/7 to keep the lights on. The entity that is in charge of the transmission system is NISO, the New York Independent System Operator. It manages the transmission system and also oversees wholesale energy markets. Because it regulates the transmission system, it's answerable to the FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The local component of the grid is the distribution system. The FERC has nothing to do with that. It's the utilities own, operate, and manage their distinct distribution systems in their distinct service territories. Energy resources, storage, renewables, what have you, can be interconnected on the distribution system and on the transmission system. The Lincoln Park project will interconnect to the transmission system. This was, when I first heard about this project, this is what was really baffling me, because I knew that the local distribution system, the substation in Ulster Park, there's declining peak load. There's not a need for this kind of project. And I was like, why there? And it's because it's interconnected to the transmission system. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that is the case later on. But the larger context is right now we're in the midst of major changes in our energy system. There's a reform effort underway, but these changes are happening also on their own, where we're moving from the conventional system of large-scale generation and long-distance transmission to a more distributed energy resource where the energy is generated closer to where it's consumed, so on your rooftop, right, rather than coming long distances. And we view this as a good thing because it's cleaner power, it's local power, it's more efficient because you're not transporting that power over great distances. We're never going to eliminate the transmission system entirely, of course, but we're going to rely on it a lot less. This project is really it's a conventional in the sense that it's adding power to the transmission system to address peak load, rather than the energy resources, which we're going to hear about from our panelists on the distribution system. So I want to stop there and turn to our speakers. Our first speaker is Bill Acker. Actually, Bill and Carl Robigo are both going to be covering the basics, Energy Storage 101, what you need to know. Dr. Acker currently serves as the first executive director of the New York Battery and Energy Storage Consortium, where he has grown the organization to more than 150 member companies, created the BEST, that's an acronym, B-E-S-T, Test and Commercialization Center, it might also be the best, I don't know, and performed pioneering work in advancing markets, policy, technology, and product development. He has more than 30 years of experience in the energy sector and is working closely with state agencies and stakeholders in the development of the energy storage roadmap to support New York's goal of 1.5 gigawatts of energy storage by 2025. Carl Robigo is the Executive Director of Pace Energy and Climate Center at Pace University, Elizabeth Howe School of Law in White Plains. Both Carl and the Pace Center have been working for clean energy and empowering communities for nearly 30 years. Carl has led the research and development program in energy storage at the U.S. Department of Energy, has been a commissioner at the Texas Public Utility Commission, and he has even been a utility executive. He's played both sides. He brings all the perspective to reviewing this proposal. And at the far end there, we have CLP's own Evelyn Wright, who's going to talk about the emissions impacts of the proposed Lincoln Park project, which is a critical question in the seeker process and for our communities. Evelyn, in addition to being a member of CLP, is the founder of Sustainable Energy Economics, which provides climate and energy policy analysis for governments, nonprofits, and businesses. She has analyzed energy technologies and greenhouse gas emissions policies for the Department of Energy, US EPA, Great Plains Institute, Environmental Defense Fund, State of Vermont, and several countries in Europe and Asia. Her work focuses on developing and visualizing strategies for transitions to a low-carbon economy and making detailed energy data useful for decision-making. She has also taught economics and climate policy at Franklin and Marshall College, Towson University, and the Washington Center. She holds a PhD in ecological economics from Rensselaer. So, very high-credential panel. I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who's going to start us off. And what we'll do is we'll do the presentations all first, and then we'll open it up to questions and discussion.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Bill.
Very good. Well, thank you, Jen. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to do some stage setting, and then Carl's going to present a little more details in a PowerPoint presentation. This is a remarkably exciting time in the energy storage field. We have seen the energy storage. Okay. Yep. There we go. Okay. I might have to stand and mark with the mic. So as I was saying, this is a really exciting time for the energy storage field. We've seen the energy storage field really transform the consumer electronics industry.
Can you talk louder or talk more into the mic?
Is this on?
I might have to hold
You know what?
Go full on rock star.
There we go. All right, here we go. Okay, so we've seen the energy storage technology really transform the portable electronics sector. I mean, I think most of us remember when cell phones were nearly the size of your shoe and half the phone was a battery, and you used to have to carry 2 batteries with you and replace them. And over the past 2 decades, battery technology has gotten fundamentally a lot better. It's allowed for what we all experience with portable electronics today, with smartphones, with watches that do crazy things, and computers, etc. The important thing that's going on, though, with that is that improvement in battery technologies and the incredible reduction of cost of battery technologies are now allowing them to offer advantages in a couple of other sectors. And so, to put this in a little perspective, back 2010 or so time, a battery cost about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. Now, don't worry about the units kilowatt hours, just remember $1,000. That same cell today costs about $150. So think about any other thing in your life that's gone down from $1,000 to $150 in the past 7 or 8 years. So these things are getting a lot cheaper and a lot better. And what that means is they can do some things they never could do before. One of them is electric vehicles. So we're seeing batteries potentially transform our entire transportation industry, getting rid of fossil fuels completely, potentially, and allowing for the transportation industry to be a really clean, really productive industry. And we're seeing a lot of action happening with that. We're also seeing batteries being able to help the electricity grid. So I'm going to talk a lot about what batteries can do today. Now, not every time someone puts a battery with something, you got to ask a lot of questions. You got to look at various things. But I want to make sure you understand that there are a lot of opportunities for batteries to do a lot of good on the electricity grid. And one of the reasons that is because of the way the electricity grid was designed. The electricity grid, as Jen said, is an amazing engineering wonder. It also is very, very unique in the way it's designed. It's about the only industry in the world where you don't store the product. You think about any other industry. You're a toy manufacturer. You manufacture toys all year long, you put them in warehouses. Christmas comes, you deliver a lot of toys, sell a lot of toys in December. Well, you didn't have to make all those toys Christmas morning. The electricity industry has to make all those toys Christmas morning. They have to do everything in time. Nobody else works that way. Our industry doesn't work that way. Sushi industry doesn't even work that way. Nobody works that way except for the electricity industry. Why? Because they didn't have energy storage. It wasn't cost effective. You needed to be able to make everything in real time. That has huge ramifications to the electricity grid. What it means is that we have to have so much overcapacity in our electricity grid. We have to have peaker plants that sit idle most of the year and are only turned on for 50 hours, 100 hours, 2 days, 3 days, a week during the year in order to make our power. We have to have all the transmission lines sized for those very peak days. All of the grid is built for the absolute peak. Now, there's another reason why, as you get onto the grid, that energy storage can really help, and that is the grid is changing, as Jen just said. When you look at the grid today, we are seeing, and we do want to see, a lot more renewable energy on the grid. And as you start to put more renewable energy onto the grid, you understand that renewable energy gives you energy when Mother Nature wants to give you energy, not when you throw the light switch. So you need to be able to deal with that. So there are a bunch of compelling reasons for energy storage to drive and get onto the grid. And the state has been recognizing that. And we recently had a very important announcement from the state in the beginning of the year with setting a goal for energy storage on the grid. And that goal is to get 1.5 gigawatts of energy storage onto our electricity grid by 2025. And there are a lot of good reasons behind that, and we can dig into some of them today. And as I said, my remarks are going to be kind of at the high level, but then we can dig in as deep as you folks want to go. So what I do want to do here is I want to delve a hair into these three particular areas where energy storage benefits the electricity grid. The first, as I say, is making the grid fundamentally more efficient. And that means that you don't have to design everything to be the absolute peaks all the time. To do that, you really want to smooth out the very high peak times of the grid. It's the August afternoon when everybody's air conditioner is running. The times when you have very high demand. And you can do that, as Jen was just talking about, both on the wholesale market side, meaning the transmission grid level, and at the local level. So that those two pieces kind of play together. So there are reasons why people might want to put devices on to smooth and to reduce those peaks at the transmission level, and there are other reasons why people might want to put those devices more locally distributed. And we'll get to kind of the different aspects of how energy storage can go onto the grid in a moment. The second really important part of this whole thing is renewable energy and getting renewable energy onto the grid. And putting renewable energy onto the grid, there are a number of reasons why we would really like to be able to have flexible assets to go along with that renewable energy. And so when you think about if you want to put solar onto the grid or you want to put wind energy onto the grid, the kind of obvious one is the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time, so you want to shift the energy. You want to be able to take energy that was made in the morning and shift it to the evening if you're a residential area and you kind of peak load in the evening, for instance, with solar energy. You want to be able to shift that energy. But you also want to be able to do a few other things because you look at the output of a solar panel, for instance, you'll see fluctuations as clouds go over. That can cause issues with stability and other things. So you want to be able to smooth quickly. So those pieces. And then there's something that's referred to in the industry as hosting capacity, meaning that when you have a circuit, there's only so much renewable energy you can put onto that circuit before you might run the risk of backfeeding electricity back up the circuit on a particularly light load day. So there are hosting capacity reasons where by putting energy storage on that circuit, you actually can now allow more solar or more wind or other renewable energies on there. Then the third key kind of linchpin of why people are driving for energy storage on the grid is resiliency and reliability. I think it's pretty obvious that if you have a building and you have energy storage in the building and the power goes out, you now have the ability to have battery backup. It's That's why you have batteries in your flashlight, right? You have the ability to have that resiliency and reliability. So those are three key drivers for why we're very excited about what energy storage can do for the electricity grid. Now, there's a whole bunch of work in transforming from what it can do to how you actually do it and do it right. And that's the work that's going on right now. So NYSERDA in New York State is developing an energy storage roadmap that's going on right as we speak to be able to lay out how and where these things should go onto the grid. How do you actually make the economics right so that people will put them on the grid? And when you look at that, there are all kinds of different potential energy storage projects on the grid. So the one that we're talking about here tonight is a very large scale, a 20 megawatt project. That's a lot of batteries, right? That's a very big set of units. The other extreme to that are little home units. And people might have seen Tesla Powerwalls. Other companies are making similar things like that. These are devices that are quite small, can mount on the wall, that can provide resiliency for a house and also provide these benefits. And a number of companies are doing those kinds of things where they can be aggregated together so that you can have a fleet of them working together so the homeowner can sign up to have them work with other homeowners to be able to do benefits to the grid and also help with renewable energy. The other kind of in between those 2 points are building energy storage areas, and that's one that we're seeing a lot of traction right now in New York State, particularly down in New York City. So we're starting to see a number of the larger buildings in New York City putting energy storage in order to reduce the peak load of the building. So that saves the building owner money and also allows for combining with renewables at the building that might be on the side of the building. So those are some of the key reasons for why we expect to see energy storage coming on. We expect to see a lot of it coming on. It already is in a number of places in the world. But we still have work to do to get the rules right, to get everything set, and to move this forward. So very eager to talk with you tonight about this, take any questions later, and I'm now going to pass it over to Carl, who's going to kind of delve in a little deeper on some of these things.
Yep, and I got pictures too. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work without a microphone, but as I'm looking at your faces in the back, if you're having trouble hearing me, anyone? Good. I figured that all those years in the Army would be worth something. You got it? That's you. Oh, you're going to put mine up. Oh, I'm sorry. I closed it because I didn't. Let's get it. Evelyn is a pro at this stuff. If you need the AV kid, she's really good at this. She's also got all the hardware. So everything Bill just said about energy storage is important, and I'm going to dive in a little detail so you can sort of understand it. But I think in fairness, I probably ought to tell you that as far as I can tell from the limited amount of information that is actually available about this project, almost none of it applies to this project. Okay? And there is some, and so I'm going to call that out because storage is exciting, and there's really some benefits for it. The one real clear benefit that happens every time somebody installs another storage project is that it helps to make more energy storage more affordable. So back in 2008 or 9, I leased a couple of Volts and bought one, leased some when I was at Austin Energy and bought one and encouraged other people to buy one. And because I did that, Jen's Bolt was actually more affordable.
Thanks.
Right? Yeah. I've also spent way too much on video cameras and computers over the years. My wife Pam will tell you that. But I'm helping to make these things more affordable for everybody down the line. And that's pretty darn exciting. We are in a space in the electricity business where it's no longer the economics of cathedrals, it's more like the economics of cars. The more we make, the cheaper they get. Meaning the more of us can afford them. So the same cell phone that was the size of your shoe and you carried the spare batteries for was outrageously expensive when it was first available. And now 14-year-olds, have iPhone 10s, right? So it is true that anything that happens in the energy storage world is good for those of us who can benefit from energy storage, but you have to ask what else you're getting for the deal, right? Is this energy storage project a good energy storage project? Is it doing other things like advancing other business models for storage that you're going to be interested in? And in this particular configuration, and Evelyn will handle a lot of that, in this particular configuration where it is hooked up to two reciprocating engines, big, just sort of piston engines that will run on natural gas, is that the best thing for your community, right? That's ultimately what it's going to come down to for you. But so that you can have that as intelligent conversations among yourselves and with your neighbors, which everybody hopes you do, let's dive in to what's going on with storage so that we can all sound, well, I can only make you as smart as I am on this, so you're going to get everything I know. First of all, that's my grandson, and he is my grandson, and I'm giving the talk, so I get to use the picture, okay? And I've got, it's a long family tradition. So you heard about PACE. We're at a law school. We're kind of a think and do tank. More information later. By the way, I make all these slides available, and however CLP can share them. There's nothing secret going here. Jen and Bill both hinted at the context that is kind of important. Between this thing called New York Rev and between this revolution in smaller scale energy technology that is cleaner and more efficient, we are on the threshold of a giant grid modernization event. And if our utilities will embrace this idea, as well as our policymakers and regulators, we have an opportunity to get our electricity services in a way we've never gotten them before. Standing in the way of that was everything we've ever done before, which was that big central station, big power plants everywhere to solve the problems mentality. And it's still around. But grid modernization brings the idea of these advanced technologies, think, smaller, faster, smarter, to our big, dumb, one-way electricity system of 100 years ago. It is growing. The market context in which this is happening is particularly challenging. You may have heard in this area, electricity sales are flat. That's because, damn it, you people got more efficient, right? Your houses are better, your windows are better, your light bulbs are better. You're using your electricity more as you're conscious about your electricity use. And what used to be a 4 to 6% growth business every year is now like a 0% growth business. But it's also getting peakier. And the word we use for that is load factor. It means we use more of our electricity during fewer hours. And that means that the system can get pretty expensive because you have to build big fat wires, but they're only used a few hours a year. And solving that problem is a big part of that, solving that efficiency problem that Bill mentioned, which is that we can make the total use of the system more efficient if we can practically spread out our use. You may still be able to all turn your air conditioners on a summer day at 5 p.m., but because we'll have storage, because we have energy management, we may use less and we may be able to use electricity we made early in the day at noon when the sun was shining hot. Right? So that's why we want to do this with these small technologies, because we can connect your usage patterns to more efficient operation of the grid. It's also true that the power sector revenues are declining, except for the guys that tend to serve those peak loads. Because when we're desperate for electricity at 5 p.m. on August 16th, the prices go sky high. And you can actually make a living playing against the most expensive 100 or 200 hours a year. And there's 8,760 hours a year. But you can actually make a living. You can actually afford to buy an expensive machine that only runs 100 or 200 hours a year. In some cases, even fewer, because the prices go so high. That looks like the game that this project is aiming toward. And what's interesting about it is the storage may actually help those gas engines operate more efficiently, because it gives them the ability to not have to go on and off real fast, but to smooth their operation with batteries, which is a great use of batteries and it will help reduce pollution, but it is not about you having storage or your community having storage. And then an acronym everybody needs to learn is DER, Distributed Energy Resources. These are those small technologies. This is the rooftop solar, the community solar, the shared solar, the technologies and programs that we would like to run through community choice aggregation. It's demand response, energy efficiency. It's a whole suite of little things that we can all be part of. It means, that revolution means we are going to be more engaged if our utilities reach out to us and find ways for us to partner together. It means we can contribute in providing reliability and resiliency improvements to our grid, which should lower the cost for us and, importantly, for for our children and grandchildren. But it is going to require some upfront investments. So, also exciting, it can enable this new kind of grid architecture where we group together neighborhoods that involve maybe commercial entities like hospitals and supermarkets, but also homes like retirement homes or multifamily homes or even individual homes connected on the grid into more resilient, what they call islandable segments of the grid, where we can actually have an outage due to a superstorm or some unforeseen weather or mechanical event, and we'll still have the electricity we need to live, right? And to keep vital medical and care equipment running. All that's enabled, again, when you have both generation and some energy storage that can connect and disconnect from the entire grid. So that's the magic. We don't have to just turn on a backup generator. You know, like Pam and I have to live through some hurricanes in Houston, hurricane in Houston once where the neighbor with the generator, his food stayed cold, but dang, you know, all night long that generator ran. The storage can help us ride through and last longer, and even if you can't get the fuel. There's a lot of technologies associated with it. I've run through it, so I'm not going to take the time there. We're going to do a real quick walkthrough because when we talk about storage, it's also good to know what we're talking about. There's many different kinds already out there in some cases. As you know, and Bill already mentioned, we're all carrying energy storage devices right today. You know, it's not yet to be invented. It's a part of our lives. It has been ever since we've had flashlights and other things. So, but deploying it even more widespread and closing the gap between the really big and the really small is where the action is in storage. Think community scale. I should also mention, by the way, I'm going to show you later on, this organization, the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, IREC we say in the biz, is a not-for-profit organization that has done some reports on storage and community power and lots of other stuff. I'm very proud of them. I sit on the board, so it's also a commercial, but great resource, irecusa.org, for lots of information about what's going on in this place, and I stole liberally from it with permission from our staff. Not to intimidate you, but this is the Department of Energy and the Energy, Electric Policy Research, EPRI?
EPRI.
Yeah, we just say EPRI, I can't even remember what it stands for anymore. But they put together, there's a whole bunch of stuff out there, okay? There's everything, and this scale here, by the way, is how long it can run, how long it takes before it's empty, and how much power it can provide. Again, these units, Bill already confused you with kilowatt hours. I'm just sticking with kilowatts. But if you multiply the kilowatts times the time, you'll get kilowatt hours. That's actually how that works. But there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff out here. I'm going to show you some of these separately. There are chemical batteries. There are flow batteries. There are mechanical devices. There are, we use all the forms of energy and try to store them. There's even SMEDS, which is not like a cousin of a Smurf. It's superconducting magnetic energy storage, which it's not going to be there in our lifetimes. It's probably never going to be. So don't worry about it. But we'll go. We did some SMEDS work when I was at ran a lab in Houston. But let's just forget that for a minute. This one kind of smooths out the big ones. This is the ones you see, sort of should know. Share with your friends over barbecue, you know, and stuff like that. Show how cool you are when you're at the bar or whatever. We're talking about flywheels that come, and these are, I'll show you a picture in a minute. These are beer kegs you bury in your backyard, or maybe you put them in a device, but it's a wheel that spins real fast. And you can tap the energy of that spinning wheel to make a little electricity. And they're usually done with frictionless bearings, so they just sit there and spin. I'm talking 300,000 revolutions a second. So you can tap a little bit of power with them, but of course you slow them down too much, you got to put more power back in to get them spinning again. Batteries now encompass all kinds of ranges, multiple days to seconds, very small to very big, and they're Lego blocks. You can just keep chunking them together as long as you have good management technologies that make them work well. That's how we get electric cars, which have hundreds of individual battery cells linked together and managed, right? Pumped storage, I'll show you in a minute, is the idea of just pushing heavy water up a hill and then letting it fall when you want to. So let's look at some pictures. Here's pumped storage. The birth of the American environmental movement, by and large, owes itself to Con Ed's proposal to put a pumped storage facility on top of Storm King. They lost. NRDC was formed. We had the concept of citizen intervention in environmental lawsuits, raising environmental issues and energy projects, and CLP eventually and other organizations like that came about, PACE came about, because we could get involved in energy decisions, which is why you're here. It takes a lot of energy to pump something heavy uphill, but this was supposed to be a darling of the nuclear power era, when we'd have a lot of extra energy at night, and we'd pump it up, and then when it got hot during the day, we'd let it fall through a turbine and make electricity. The flywheels I told you about, they don't really look like beer kegs. Devices spinning real fast around a magnetic bearing, and like I said, you can draw electricity off of them. These are not super commercial yet, but there are some out there, and they're improving them. You can imagine when you're spinning something 300,000 revolutions a minute, you really do have to have a perfect disk, because any irregularities in the thing is going to go all over the place. Compressed energy storage, not a big issue here. In Texas, we had a lot of these because we had a lot of underground caverns. You can use extra energy to pump air into a cavern, and it gets compressed, and then when you want it, you let it come out, and it acts like a supercharger on a car in a gas engine, and just makes a gas engine more efficient. Okay, so this like the project being proposed here, is the coupling of storage to make a fossil device a little bit more efficient, which is worth some money these days. SolidState batteries, that's what we have in our phones. They're just anode, cathode, electrolyte, and electrons, and do their thing. We can also do this with liquids now, with these things called flow batteries. A lot of hope for these. Not quite high levels of manufacturing yet, but a lot of people think, because some of these liquids can actually be relatively benign. They're not acid like old lead acid batteries and stuff. So there's some pretty exciting work going on there. Here's a big takeaway. This is how many energy projects are out there. You can see how many of them have to do with electrochemical and thermal storage. By the way, oversizing your hot water heater would be a way of doing storage. It's not an efficient way of doing it, but if everybody bought a 200-gallon hot water heater, we would be participating in the energy storage business, right? We'd be heating up 200 gallons, and then we'd be using it for the day, and then we'd be heating it up. And if it made a difference what time of day we heated it, we might actually have a kind of an economic proposition there. Don't do it. It's not economic right now, but there is a way to store thermal energy. And the number of pumped hydro projects are very small, but they're freaking huge, right? That's where really all the storage is going on in the United States right now. It's the little things that are scampering around like mammals among the dinosaurs that have got Bill and me and everybody else excited about this business. Storage technologies can be put anywhere in the grid. Like we've been taught, we think of them as small in our pockets, in the distribution grid, at our homes, or coupled together in neighborhood configurations. But as I described, we've found that there's actually value. One of the companies I worked with, AES, developed a storage model where you put big batteries right next to a coal plant, and you could actually get added value out of the coal plant. That same model is this project. That if you put a battery right at the point where a power plant injects into the grid, you can improve its value proposition and make more money out of it, enough to pay for the batteries. So, but all the excitement stuff, the microgrids, happens on the right side of this slide, okay? Again, I'll leave you the deck and you can look at it. Those functions, these things break down into these words. Things like doing time shift and renewables integration that Bill already mentioned. Ancillary services is a big part of the value proposition for this project. They think they can do ramping, maybe, or load following, spinning reserves, meaning just keeping an engine running so that if the grid suddenly needs more electricity, it can absorb the demand without having to suddenly turn an engine on, right? That's a spinning reserve. Frequency response, keeping the whole system nicely in balance, right at 60 hertz or 60 cycles per second, for those of you that go back that far before they changed it to hertz. Right here. And other sorts of services as well. So what should you ask, right? What should we do when we get involved in seeing a project that's, quote, a storage project? Well, starting at the bottom, what's the market play? What is this about? Is this about bringing storage technology to your community to enhance resiliency and reliability of your local grid? I understand this project will be interconnected at the transmission level, so it's really a game. It's really set up for playing into the wholesale markets and won't interact with your local distribution grid. I may be wrong, but that's what I understand right now. It's that left-hand side of that diagram I showed you, playing among the big generators on the big grid, not at our level, okay? But what's it gonna cost? And we have to have, you live here, so you don't just mean, is it gonna cost or benefit us a certain amount of tax revenue? Is it also gonna cost or benefit you in terms of pollution? Again, Evelyn will get into some of that stuff. How big will it be? What impacts will it have? Will it lead to more, or will it be the last one that happens? Will it have any impact on the grid? Is it going to require lots of other infrastructure? I understand this project is pretty close to a gas pipeline. This project is pretty close to transmission lines. It will not have a huge infrastructure footprint, about 100 acres or so, as I recall. So some of those local sort of on the ground details don't look as big as, you know, pump storage on Storm King, but it is a fossil generating engine. I've got a bunch of slides in here about how to think about value. I've already talked about how fast prices are falling. Let me focus just 1 second on sort of the background picture. If we all had our way, this is kind of how New York would be looking at this. This is how our utilities would be looking at storage in their grid, or our ISO, the independent system operator, would be looking at integrating storage into the New York grid. And again, how our regulators would work. They would think about trying to get this going, and they have, right? They put a goal out there of 1.5 gigawatts, is it 1.5?
1.5
Yeah,
gigawatts.
okay, so 1,500 megawatts of storage projects out there. States that are leading are doing plans. Massachusetts has a great plan out there called State of Charge, where they comprehensively looked at all the kinds of storage and what the value is and what the payback is, to act as a guide for utilities and individual companies to sort of think about the opportunity to maximize the value. We don't have that in New York yet. Best is working on a blueprint, and they certainly are driving for that kind of strategic planning, but we don't yet have it, but we do have a proposal for a project. We work on the rules so that the right kinds of projects go in the best kinds of places, clarifying the opportunity. And then we do these projects and do them in a way in which we learn from them, in which there's lots of data, lots of information being generated. So even if we are the guinea pig or the pioneer, we know whether we want to be the guinea pig or the pioneer again. These strategies are set out in this IREC paper called Charging Ahead, that if you want to dig into, gives some really good advice about how our policymakers should address this stuff. Lastly, just let me show you the Navigant Research company, which is a sort of a utility-centric research and consulting firm, did an analysis of what do they think the next 6 years will go. It was 10 years from 2014. What's interesting here is they think the big storage opportunity is in residential storage. All of us having batteries. Again, we do too. We think that's pretty exciting, but that's not this project. This is a different kind of project with a different kind of, this is more in commercial energy storage, the up to say 2,000 megawatts of growth over that 10-year horizon. And then finally, I want to put this idea in your head. This is a kind of a semi-complicated graph, but I think I can make it pretty clear to you. And it really came home to me when I looked at this project. This line on the top is the price in dollars per megawatt hour, okay, that's units of usable energy, for a gas peaking unit, the kind of unit that's been proposed in this project. The bottom line here is the price in dollars per megawatt hour for a highly efficient combined cycle natural gas plant that uses turbines, recovers the heat from the turbine to run it through another cycle, and really gets the maximum energy out of the burning of the gas. Okay, so simple cycles, they run a few hours. Combined cycles, they run more, they run cleaner, they get more energy out of the gas, so they're cheaper. Peakers are very expensive. This, as of a few months ago, is about where energy storage was in terms of commercial scale energy storage. In other words, it's already cheaper than peakers. Okay, now this is a Colorado utility. You'd have to look at New York prices and stuff like that. I can't tell you who it is because that was the condition on which the data was given to me. But I've seen this same kind of finding repeated over and over again over the last few months. Energy storage is cheaper than a peaker. This project is about making a peaker cheaper with storage, which is an interesting combination. But head to head, storage wins standing on its own. And if we continue to develop and use storage wisely, we can get it down to the range where it starts competing with combined natural gas, and we can really do something about carbon emissions, especially in a state like New York, which is on the way to getting rid of all its coal, and the next carbon target will be natural gas in the electricity sector, and of course petroleum in our homes and in our vehicles. Okay, so lots of stuff there. Hopefully I've sort of made it clear that there's something, like Bill said, there's something exciting going on in storage. This project is a little bit different. It's got some different features to it, which means you got to ask different questions. But, I look forward to the discussion. Emma, since it's your computer, I'll let you manipulate all of that stuff.
All right, well, thanks, Carl and Bill, for that context setting. What I'll do now is kind of zoom back into the proposed Lincoln Park project and what we know about it, what we don't know about it, some of the thinking that we've been doing here at CLP about it. So, as you know, this is proposed to be a combination of a 20 megawatt battery storage unit and a 20 megawatt gas and diesel generator. So that's big for a storage project. It's not big as a power plant goes, but it's not tiny either. It's kind of in a mid-range there. And so the things I'll talk about are, first of all, what do we know about what the climate emissions might be from this project? How big are they? I'll talk about the emissions rate, what we can expect in terms of total annual emissions, how big is that, and some of the claims that GlidePath has made about this project reducing emissions on the system or supporting clean energy and how we can evaluate that. We'll ask some questions about the possible air pollutant emissions. We don't know a lot about that yet. And then I want to think about why are they proposing this project here? And the question that I think a lot of people asked at the meeting the other night, why not just build a storage-only project, right? With all this really exciting stuff going on in the storage industry, why are they proposing this weird hybrid thing? So that's what we'll talk about. Starting with the carbon emissions rate, GlidePath has told me this week that they expect that the emissions rate from the generator portion of this project will be about 800 to 850 pounds per megawatt hour of generation. So not 195, which is what they told us the other night at the meeting. So I asked them that night. I think 195 is physically impossible. And last week they called me up and said, "You're right, we made a mistake in our spreadsheet, sorry." So even at 800 to 850, that would be really astonishingly efficient for a gas engine. It would be the most efficient such project that exists in the country. Now, there are manufacturers who are building engines that are this efficient, apparently, and so it makes sense that they would install the most efficient one they could get, but even 800 to 850 is pretty aggressive. That's about 47 to 50% efficiency, so those of you who know engines know that's pretty darn efficient. For comparison, so you might remember GlidePath put up a slide with that 195, and they said, well, a coal plant is up around 200 pounds per megawatt, 2,000 pounds per megawatt hour. That's not really a good comparison for us because the coal plants in New York State are all going to be gone within a couple of years. So I suggested that they take that off the slide because it's really not a good comparison for our context. So what most of the fossil plants in this state are emitting at is somewhere in between 800 to 1,400 pounds per megawatt hour. So if their 800 to 850 is right, it would be at the low end of the emissions rate for gas burning plants. And that's because it's newer than most of them. Most of these are older. A new combined cycle plant, which is the most efficient type of gas plant, would be a little bit more efficient than that. So somewhere in the 700 to 800 pounds per megawatt hour range. So what can we expect then for total emissions over the course of the year? GlidePath says that their best guess is that this project will be, the generator will be running on average about 4 to 6 hours per day. It'll operate more in the summer and winter when loads are higher, and less in the fall and the spring when loads are lower. So it might be running 24 hours a day on hot summer days, and it might go a couple weeks at a time in the spring without running at all. They don't know exactly how much they'll operate. The New York energy market is an auction. Generators bid into it. They say, we'll put our energy onto the system if you pay us at least this much. And that how much they pay is basically, or how much they bid is based on how much it costs for them to run their plants. So the more efficient a plant is, the less fuel it has to buy, the better its bid is going to be. And then the NISO picks, picks the bid, the highest bid that they need to meet all the energy needs that we have, and everybody gets paid that highest amount. So if on days when the peak loads are really high, as Bill said, that price gets bid way up, everybody else makes that highest bid amount. So you get paid the gap basically between the least efficient generator on the system and what you cost. So the Lincoln Park plant would be pretty efficient, as we saw, and so it's likely that its bid will win fairly often when loads are high. So 4 to 6 hours per day on average, it's probably not a bad estimate. So that's what I've gone with in trying to estimate the total annual emissions. So if we take 6 hours per day, 20 megawatts, 850 pounds per megawatt hour, and just multiply that out, it's about 37 million pounds of CO2 per year. And many of you at the meeting the other night rightly asked, okay, but what about the upstream methane emissions? If we add a 2.5% methane leak, which is, roughly in the range, there's a lot of estimates about this. We don't exactly know how big those methane leaks are, but 2.5% is somewhere in the range. We have a 20-year CO2 equivalent. That's about another 30,000 pounds of CO2 per year, so almost doubling that emissions rate.
30 million.
Sorry, 30 million, thank you. So if we turn that into the total tons of CO2 equivalent, it's about 30,000 metric tons. Turns out that's, I went and looked in the Hudson Valley inventory, that's about equal to the emissions of all the households in the town of Ulster. Not not all the emissions in Ulster, but just out of the household. So that's the electricity you consume, the gas or the oil in your furnace, not your cars, but just coming out of the housing stock. So that's roughly the scale. It's also about 1.5% of all of the county emissions. Okay, so again, not super huge, but not insignificant either, right? And certainly moving in the wrong direction. GlidePath is putting out an argument that this project, although it's a fossil project, is supporting clean energy and it's supporting renewables. That it's going to displace higher emitting generation on the system, and that it's going to help renewables operate more. And I want to break down that argument for you because it's theoretically correct, and yet I think it's not really appropriate to our context. So this is the argument. We have to have generators standing by on the system to meet peak capacity. We also have to have generators, as Carl said, standing by to give us moment-to-moment demand backup and also kind of minute-to-minute. So that's those ancillary services. The frequency regulation, that's your moment-to-moment balancing the grid. Spinning reserves are if something trips off someplace else, you can come on really quick within a few minutes. And so if you use a big combined cycle plant for those backup needs, those things, when you turn them on, you gotta leave them on for hours. So they can't come on and off really quickly. And so what GlidePath is saying is, we've got these super flexible batteries, we've got this super flexible engine. It can do that second by second and minute by minute regulation without you needing to turn on that larger power plant. Now, in places where there's a lot of renewable energy on the system, where we're talking 20, 30% renewable energy, what can happen is, say the wind drops out, there's not a lot of wind blowing, and so you turn on one of the gas plants to make it up. And then that big gas plant has to keep running for several hours before you can turn it back down. While that's going on, the wind comes back, and the grid operator says, sorry, we can't take you right now, we've got the gas plant running. And that's called curtailment. So you can't absorb the renewable energy on the grid because you've got these larger inflexible fossil plants that you've got committed and they need to keep running. And so what GlidePath is saying is we can avoid that because we can be moment to moment, up, down, up, down, up, down, without that need to keep it committed. And that would make sense someplace like California or Germany, where they've got so many renewables on the system that curtailment is starting to be an issue. That's not the case here. We had, I looked it up tonight, 0.5% curtailment of wind in New York State over the last couple of years. Most of that is way upstate, not around here, so it's not on our portion of the transmission grid. And it was mostly due to transmission lines being down to those wind plants, not to there being too much energy. So in theory, someday, when we have much more wind and solar on the grid, it might be that we might say, wow, we would really like some super responsive, flexible fossil plant that we can turn up and down whenever we want to in order to help balance out those renewables. But we're not there yet. And there's lots of other ways we can get flexibility on the system. We can have batteries only. We can have our electric vehicles that are all hooked up to the grid and responding to those moment-to-moment signals. So by the time we get to the point here in New York State where we might need this kind of additional flexibility reserves, there are lots of other cleaner technologies that might come along to do it. And so I wanted to break that down for you because I think this is something we're going to hear GlidePath say over and over. Well, if you're going to have renewables, you've got to have fossil to back them up. That's not true here now. We're not at that point yet.
But GlidePath says, well, those battery storage only last 4 hours. They're short term.
Right, and so we've got, right now, we're in the position where we've got lots of fossil generation on the whole New York State grid to balance it out, so we don't need to add this more. But there is something about that short duration, which I'll get to in the end, because that is an issue. Okay, so other emissions impacts. What about Air pollution, nitrous oxides, carbon monoxide, smog, asthma. The answer is, we don't know yet. They didn't fill out that portion of their environmental application form. They're gonna do a whole air study apparently once the